I think it's important just to really check in and see, well, how am I feeling? I think that piece just kind of gets pushed to the wayside because, oh, well, I have these work responsibilities and I have my kids and I need to be sure that everyone's okay. And while that is true, you also have to be sure that you're okay.
Welcome to the Betty Rocker Show, the place to be to nourish your mind, love your body, and rock your life. What's up, Rockstar? Welcome back to the show. It's so great to have you here. I'm really excited to share today's conversation with Amisha Klawonn, an embodiment and sleep coach, yoga therapist, and integrative physical therapist. Her areas of focus as a coach are sleep, women's wellness, grounding the nervous system, and manifesting. She applies many aspects of women's health in her practice, including Polyvagal Theory and hormone health, and draws from her integrative physical therapy expertise in the areas of visceral mobilization and holistic care for the whole person. She empowers people to create their visions for their lives, igniting transformation from the inside out. And in today's conversation, we are getting into many practical tips you can use in your life to bring more balance, rest, and self-love into your day. Join me in welcoming her to the show. Welcome, Amisha. So good to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I am so glad to get a chance to talk to you because your work really encompasses such a broad spectrum of important things that really support women's health. And so many of us are just maybe not paying attention to those things, or life gets really busy. We have a lot of demands on ourselves and expectations of ourselves. So I'm just really glad to have you here. And I think what would be I would really love to hear more about your journey to doing this work. Would you share a little bit of your story with us?
Sure. So I am the mother of a 10-year-old boy. And really how I came into this particular work of really focusing on sleep and how it integrates in with the body is that I had a very difficult delivery. I ended up having an emergency C-section. And I'll tell you, when we went into our birth kind of plan, I wanted to have a home birth or maybe a pool. We ended up in the hospital because that is kind of where my husband felt more comfortable. And so I was like, okay, that's fine. I can do that as long as it's still a natural birth. 22 hours later, there was still no birth. And so we ended up with an emergency C-section, which I had actually ignored everything about a C-section because I was like, there's no way I'm having that. And lo and behold, there I was. And so that kind of started me down that road. But then for 4 years, my son didn't sleep. And so we did a lot of things, but I was up probably 15 times a night for 4 years. And so needless to say, my nervous system was always on, and so was his. And I kind of had this inkling that the birth had something to do with it, but I hadn't really traveled down that road and like into what the nervous system feels like for children who have had a traumatic birth, because it was quite traumatic for me, but it was also traumatic for him. And so beginning to travel down that road of, well, what does that look like? And why do I always feel so stressed out? So now he's 10, he's been sleeping for 6 years, and still every night I'm like, I'm so grateful I got a full night's sleep, because for 4 years I worked full time, woke up 15 times a night. I don't really remember a whole lot about that. And it impacted everything. It impacted my body, my mind, my relationships, and my spirit.
And I was just listening to you, just really empathizing, because I think any new parent is going to go through a certain degree of sleepless nights, but your case sounds very extreme. And then the amount of fight or flight status that you were both in is it's very telling, as to why you were feeling like you can't even remember that time. It's very interesting. I think a lot about the impact that childbirth has on our physical body. And I talk about that a lot with my coaching clients and members when we're doing our workouts and just talking about body alignment and just being aware of things like have shifted around in our pelvis. So we're trying to really be aligned. And I'm sure in your work as a physical therapist, you yourself have helped a lot of women with that, but it's not something I'm used to talking about or hearing about, this aspect of birth. And I'm really grateful you are sort of integrating these pieces for us, because that's a really important part of many women's lives that maybe just goes ignored or gets swept under the rug, because it can be a very traumatic and beautiful and life-changing experience, which you're describing. So what are some of the things that have come about for you in your practice as a result of this experience? And what else did you learn?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I really noticed is that whenever I tried to talk about it, I would kind of get this standard response of, well, you're fine and the baby's fine, so you should be just so happy.
You were dismissed, basically.
That is what it felt like. And so, I really tried to get myself to happy. I had pretty severe postpartum depression for quite a while. And part of that was because I hadn't processed this piece about the birth. And so I did have some physical complications. And so I did go to traditional PT, and it didn't really make a difference. And, I have wonderful PT orthopedic colleagues, and I saw a couple of them, and I feel like they did everything in their realm that they knew how to do. And I was like, this just is not working for me. I tried acupuncture, which it did help, but it still didn't quite get to the piece that I felt I had maybe disconnected from.
The root cause. What was the root cause? You were trying to get it.
And so physically, I started to see a visceral mobilization physical therapist. And that truly made a big difference in how I felt.
Just for the layman here, describe what visceral means in that context.
Visceral mobilization is where the organs and the fascia surrounding the organs are mobilized.
Right.
And so it is frequently done by a physical therapist, but there are other professions that can also do it. And so there's a variety of different providers out there.
And why would we want to have those body parts moved around and adjusted? Tell us more about that.
So particularly if there's any sort of surgical issue that's gone on where there's been a break in the fascia. Yes. And so for me, it was a C-section, but for other people, it can be something as simple as an appendectomy. And even though it's a very small scar, they still have to break the fascia to remove that. And that can make a difference in how everything else moves. And so for me, I lost my hip extension. On my left hip, I could not extend my hip. And so after traditional orthopedic PT, after doing all the things that I had learned after yoga, just nothing brought it back. One session of visceral mobilization, and it was back 80%.
Because of the fascial connection piece. Yeah.
And so that was a piece that hadn't been addressed.
Ask you as a practitioner, would you talk to us a little bit more about the importance and the connectivity of the fascial tissue and of that part of the body, just as an educational piece? Because I think knowing more about how it works will really help my audience ask for what they need or look for what they need if that is something that they're interested in.
Oh, absolutely. So the fascia is continuous throughout the body. And so it connects every piece of us, and it surrounds each organ and our muscles. And so it really is continuous throughout the entire body. And so having one piece that has been cut into or damaged in some way or injured in some way, it can pull on that area. And so if you can imagine that this little area is being pinched when it's supposed to glide. So if that area is being kind of pulled up and pinched, it's going to affect the rest of the chain.
Right.
And so what visceral mobilization does, and to an extent myofascial release, can go into these areas and begin to move it in the way that it's meant to. And over the course of time, a duration of time, things can really tighten up because of this one spot.
Yep. And I've always been fascinated by the way that trigger point referrals work. Just thinking about how so a trigger point is like a hyperirritable nodule in a part of your muscle tissue. And if you are a practitioner and you're going in to treat that, sometimes the person will experience a referred sensation elsewhere. And even without trigger point work, or you can be experiencing a headache, for instance, and it's actually coming from tight nodules in your suboccipital muscles, for instance. So I have always been fascinated by these referral patterns and thinking about how the fascial layer and how it's connected through your entire body is a part of that, and all of these signals that transfer around your body. Just really appreciate you explaining that in more depth, because I find there are many mysteries in the body that sometimes we're just like, what's going on? And that you can't pinpoint the issue. And the body is so connected in so many ways, not just with the fascia, all these different organ systems. And it's amazing.
Absolutely.
So, back to your story, which has been so interesting and helpful to hear about. After that C-section, you said you were experiencing this your left hip wasn't working properly. You had this visceral manipulation. Did I say it right? You called it something. It wasn't visceral manipulation. Mobilization, yeah. And that was what finally restored like the connectivity in the fascial tissue. So what happened next?
Yeah. So with visceral mobilization, you generally go every 4 to 6 weeks generally. It's not like traditional PT where you go every week and have it done, because the theory behind that is that once the fascia has been released and the organs have been mobilized, the body takes over, and the body has an innate healing process that will allow it to do what it's meant to do. And so you want to give it some time and space to do that. And so I saw a visceral therapist for probably 3 years. And the only reason I'm not anymore is because we recently moved. And so I just haven't found a new provider near us yet. But it really made a huge difference, number one, in my physical mobility, but then also in kind of how my mind and my spirit felt, because my physical body felt so much better.
This integration piece is really powerful, and how you are, proactively seeking self-care for yourself and not allowing yourself to be dismissed, and continuing to advocate and go forward along the path of seeking answers for yourself. This is in itself like a powerful self-valuing activity, in my opinion. But I know that you help coach a lot of women on some of these types of deeper core issues where they maybe don't feel the confidence in themselves once they've been dismissed in that way, or they don't even see it as being dismissed. They feel that someone in authority has said, no, this isn't important. And so they just diminish what's important to them. Where has your interest in this work and worthiness come from? And what are some of the issues that you see and help your women with when you're coaching them?
Well, so that interest really comes from both a combination of my PT practice and my coaching practice, because women in particular, particularly after childbirth, things are a little bit different. And also depending how that childbirth went. If it was as per the plan, right? We make these birthing plans that are pretty elaborate, and sometimes they don't go that way. And so then you may feel like a failure that it didn't go that way, when really it didn't have anything per se to do with you as a person. It's just how things went. Sometimes the medical system can change the outcome of things depending how things were started with birth. And I think that a lot of times women feel really powerless here in this piece of it. And so it can start there. And then once the baby's there, everyone's telling you what to do and how you should do it. And you should sleep train, and you should feed like this, and you should breastfeed or you should not breastfeed. And there's so many things that as a woman, you're like, I don't even know what to do, and I just think it's a really vulnerable place to be, especially with your first child.
It's so interesting what you're talking about, because these themes of autonomy and, our control over our own lives, we of course, we try our best to exert some modicum of control in our lives. And it sounds like coming up with a birthing plan that you want to be super specific is like one of those areas where you're trying to exert like your desires on an outcome that you have no control over. And this in itself can be really difficult. But then say you've gone through all of that, and that now you're presented with everyone around you trying to tell you what to do. And like you said, all these other experts, right? And as a new mom, you're probably first, on the one hand, grateful for suggestion and for experience and wisdom of others. But what happens when all that experience and wisdom conflicts or conflicts with your own intuition? Like, how do you reconcile these pieces?
Yes. Well, for me, I lost all access to my intuition and really felt like I wasn't really worthy of having this child. And like that really led to a big spiral for me. It also led to the work that I do now, where building that back up, stopping some of the parenting blogs, stopping the advice coming in from well-meaning people, and putting up some boundaries and saying, so like we didn't do sleep training. And in hindsight, maybe I would have gotten someone to help support us a little bit more. But I feel very strongly that like my son wouldn't have done well with that with some of the ways that sleep training is taught. Like just in my heart, I just knew it wasn't the right thing for him.
What is the sleep training that you're referring to?
Well, so there's a lot of different ways. So we very, very briefly tried like where you let the baby cry it out. And so you're not responding to the baby when they have something going on. And I literally almost had a nervous breakdown in the corner. And so, I have written about this on my blog, but it was a pretty low place. And I was like, this is not what I thought parenthood was. And so I think that there are ways that are calmer to the nervous system to teach our kids how to sleep. I think that everyone is going to do what is best for them also, with that said.
And you mentioned how you felt disconnected from your own intuition. In hindsight, as you look back at that time, what were the things that you wished you had done or had listened to in yourself that you feel would have been better?
Yeah. I mean, I wish that I had taken some of the support that was offered to me. I felt like I had to really do it all myself. I wish that I had bought the pre-made baby food and not felt like I had to make it from scratch. I wish that I hadn't cared so much about what everyone else thought about the house or the dishes or whatever, because it doesn't really matter, And so really I should have been focusing on my rest, but I didn't prioritize it.
Wow, those are some really powerful lessons learned, it sounds like. And sounds like now you do prioritize rest. And this is one of the big things that you're coaching people on doing. And I'm curious about some of the things that how do you help people prioritize rest, women in particular?
Yes. So that is actually the number one thing in my system where I do help women sleep better. But
Your system, you have a system. Tell us, name that system so that we're all aware of it, because of course we're going to leave links.
Yeah. So I call it sleeping your way to success.
I love it.
Thank you. And the number one thing is prioritizing rest. And so I think that as women especially ambitious, driven women, which is so many of us, that we, a little bit, we live in this culture where productivity is really kind of cherished. And when we're resting, it's like, why aren't you doing more? Or why, what are you doing? But when we can focus on prioritizing rest, and what I mean by that is really making a conscious effort to be in bed at a certain time, and then really cultivating that. I mean, that is the number one thing, because you can do all the sleep stuff. You can have a dark room and it can be cold, and you can have a sleep mask, and you can do all these things and not sleep. But if you're getting in bed at midnight after you worked on your computer for 3 hours, sending emails, and your stress level has gone up, your body can't truly rest.
Sure. And also, I really appreciate everything you're saying here, and especially the women I serve. One of the topics that we're talking about a lot is fitness. And I find a lot of stuff comes up around performance. You mentioned productivity. So I find these two things are very closely intertwined in many cases. And with fitness, there's like this prioritization, like we know how to make time for the things that matter to us. And we have this sort of almost incorrect prioritization of what makes the biggest difference. And while exercise makes a difference, it's not the most important thing. When exercise is combined with proper rest, this is when it makes a difference. When it's combined with nutrition, balanced nutrition, when it's combined with proper stress management, these are the things that help us the most when we're really looking at these things as a whole, holistically, and not just isolating them. So, but I think to your point, and I found this myself, is that if we're not having the conversation regularly about how important it is to prioritize rest, it falls by the wayside. And like you said, we're up late, not getting that optimal deep sleep, which we know we get in the first couple hours of when we fall asleep, but there's a specific window for that. So, if we're not getting to bed at that optimal time, we're going to miss that optimal recovery time. We're going to miss the elevation of the human growth hormone and all the things that actually optimize the work you put into your exercise. So
Yes.
this is just so important to pay attention to. So how do you help? What are tips and how do you coach women to actually go to bed on time?
Yeah. Well, so I think the first thing is just making that commitment that I am going to prioritize my rest. And so what does that look like for my day? And so then the next thing is rituals and routines, because so many of us just kind of do the same thing on autopilot each day, which is great because we don't want to have to think about every single thing we do every day. But sometimes those habits, they can support us or they cannot. And so what does that look like? So beginning with our mornings, right? Because what we do through the day is going to affect our nights and how we sleep. And so what is your morning ritual, right? So as soon as you wake up, I encourage women to just begin to track what they're doing without judgment, but just begin to track. Okay, well, I wake up, my alarm's on my phone, so I turn it off, and then, I have some notifications, I'm going to look at those. And then I end up looking at my email, and then, okay, I'm out of bed, and it's 20 minutes later, and I've checked my email, and I've sent a couple, and I'm going to have a cup of coffee, I'm getting ready, and I'm off to work, or wherever I'm going. And, that is a challenging morning in terms of our nervous systems. So, I relate a lot back to the nervous system because how we spend our days and where in our system we spend that affects how deeply we can rest at night. And what I have seen a lot in my clients is that women, especially who really value performance and productivity, tend to spend a lot of their lives in this sympathetic nervous system. And so they're on all the time. And even if they feel tired, they'll have a cup of coffee or they'll have something and they'll keep going because there are things to get done. But they're not really feeling into, this is how I feel right now. They'll just push through it. And that piece, I think, is the beginning of disconnection through the day, where we don't feel into our bodies. So first off, I just really have women track what they're doing through the day. Like
just
when
to
are
sort
they
of
eating?
like come to terms with,
Yeah,
let me just assess. First, I'll just assess
let's just
this.
see where I'm at.
Yeah.
And very often there are good things in there, right? And so we're going to keep the good and just keep adding good, right? Until the good just overtakes what's not working. I'm not a big fan of scarcity mindsets and like, you can't do this or you have to eat this or, we just add the good.
No, I love how you framed all of that so perfectly with your wording. And it was always leaning into like, what's a positive way I can frame this for myself? Not what can I take away or what's bad. We're very using our words here to really isolate and look for what's the good in my day and what good can I add? And how does that slowly replace the things that aren't as optimal for me, right? Those are all great mindset.
Exactly. And so then continuing to track through the day. And so generally, and this is very general, is that women will go to work. If they have families, they'll come home. They're making their dinner. They're helping their kids with their homework. They're doing their thing. They get the kids to bed. And then finally, they're like, oh, thank God I have some time. Maybe have a glass of wine, maybe sit with their partner, maybe watch a Netflix show. And all those things are great. In moderation, right? oftentimes I hear that women say, this is the only time that I have for me. And so I'm going to take it and I'm going to stay up late because I want this time. And to that, I say, yes, you should have time. But let's see how we can maybe carve it into different pieces of your day so that you can prioritize rest through the day.
You mentioned earlier the sympathetic nervous system. Let's just do a refresher for those who maybe aren't familiar with the difference between the two different systems, and talk to me a little bit more about the vagus nerve, because all of that ties together. I know you're an expert on all this.
Yeah. So when we talk about polyvagal theory, we talk about people being in their sympathetic nervous system, right? And we talk about them being either really in fight or flight, or people can be in complete shutdown. And then there's a happy place in the middle. And so really, we're going to move through that ladder. It's kind of an up-down ladder throughout the day. No one's going to be in the middle all the time. But the goal is that we don't get stuck in one of these. And oftentimes when there's too much coming at us and our bodies don't have the chance to heal, we get stuck in one or the other. And very often, this can also show up with so many other symptoms. So women generally don't come to me and say, I can't sleep. It's, I thought I was doing great. I just got this new promotion and I just learned that I have Hashimoto's. Or I just got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. Or I can't believe this is happening. I don't understand. And so at some point, the body says, I'm done. And it's going to send awareness to you one way or another. And oftentimes this is how it can happen. For a lot of women, it can be kind of resistant weight loss, like they just can't lose the weight. For a lot of women, it could just be this kind of like general irritability. Like I used to feel great and now I just don't. And I don't know why. And sometimes women just take it as like, this is life. But
this is part of aging. This is aging or something,
not.
Right?
Like aging is such a gift, and it's not always seen that way, but it is such a gift to be able to age in a way that feels good. We get to have all this wisdom and we get to grow, physically, spiritually. And oftentimes, I just hear women say, oh, I'm 40 now. And so this is how it is. But I don't believe that to be true. And I think just having some models of people who are just doing amazingly well is so inspirational that doesn't have to be the case.
I agree completely. And it's so important to understand that, staying in fight or flight all the time, it also elevates cortisol. And cortisol, of course, will make it very hard for us to lose body fat. It makes us gain more body fat, especially in our belly, especially for women. There's other, obviously, detriments to being in fight or flight all the time. For some people, I've heard one of my friends who's like a recovered person who was in parasympathetic constantly, and she was always stressed out. She said, I used to pretend that was my edge. That was the edge I had because my adrenals were constantly firing. I was constantly like, revved up, right? And you pretend that this is why you have the edge, why you're going so fast, why you can get so much done, but it has a price. And if you don't have that balance of your parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest state, and you're actively seeking to cultivate that state with either meditation or quiet time, or yoga is a great way to moving practice to cultivate that. It's very hard to turn it off if you're just like in go mode all the time. And then we pile exercise on top of that. And you guys have all heard me say that exercise is a healthy stress when we are healthy. We don't want to be piling exercise on top of a stressed out system, right? It just doesn't do us any favors. And I really appreciate this conversation because it's just bringing so much awareness to the importance of paying attention to the balance that we all strive for. We ought to strive for, at least if we're not aware.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important just to really check in and see, well, how am I feeling? I think that piece also just kind of gets pushed to the wayside because oh, well, I have these work responsibilities and I have my kids and I need to be sure that everyone's okay. And while that is true, you also have to be sure that you're okay.
You talked about the first step is, of course, kind of tracking through your day and like having
Yes.
awareness of like what am I actually doing and where maybe may I be disconnected from the need to rest? What's the next sort of step that you would suggest someone take who's in that state?
Yeah. So then once we begin to look at the day, right? So as we kind of move through our day, so for instance, for mornings, I think that mornings and evenings are kind of when we go into this, especially as we enter sleep and come out of sleep, we kind of go into this theta state where our subconscious is really the most open to receiving wherever we may want to go. And so this is a great time to think about where you may want to be, or to think that, if affirmations work for people, this is a great time to use them. So for me personally, I use an affirmation of, I am safe, right, as I'm going to sleep. And it's really made a big difference in how I feel. And affirmations don't work for everyone, but you can think of just good thoughts.
Gratitudes.
Right. And
5 things that
gratitudes don't
happened in your
always work
day. Yeah.
either, right? But even just thinking of your favorite place, wherever
Right.
that may be, or a beautiful scene that you saw, but just something that brings a little light to you.
Uplifting.
Yes. Yes. And so, especially like first 5 minutes in the morning and like the last 5 minutes before you fall asleep, because that's really, as you fall asleep, your mind will think about that through the night.
I use an app sometimes called the 5-Minute Journal. And during a time in my life when I was really focused on cultivating better sleep habits and better rituals around my morning and evening and building that structure into my life, I used that app a ton because it has a morning and an evening entry. And that was really helpful because it sort of jogged my brain in a creative way of thinking of those types of thoughts. It gave me an inspiration to do that. But that's just one tip, one way to do it.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of the 5-minute gratitude journal too, which is great. But again, gratitudes sometimes don't work for everyone, depending where they're at in their kind of stage of their journey. So I try not to give that generally, but they do work if they resonate.
So developing these sort of rituals around your wake and sleep time. What about during the rest of the day? Is there anything, how can we kind of become more mindful of noticing when we're getting stressed out or getting into that constant sort of state?
Yeah. So I really encourage body check-ins every hour. And so using your phone, just have an alarm go off and just see where you're at. Right. And so really wherever you're at, and even if you need to go to the bathroom and just go and just have a minute of privacy, I really encourage people just to put a hand on their heart and then just maybe close their eyes for a moment and just breathe into that just for a couple of breaths and maybe name some of the emotions that come up during the day. And so it could be, I feel overwhelmed right now. It could be, I'm feeling nervous. I'm feeling tired, right? And maybe just ask, what is it that I need right now? And it could be, I need to go use the restroom. I need to get a glass of water. I need to just stand up. And following those little threads is going to help support your physical body, but also bring in that connection where you can connect back in with the physical and emotional.
Gosh, that is so powerful. And I love using timers for so many things. I told you about that time in my life when I was really trying to cultivate proper sleep habits. I actually would set a timer to get ready for bed an hour before going to bed, which really helped me get up there earlier. But I just love this image of a timer going off every hour or so throughout your day and you sitting there almost like giving yourself the same kind of love that your mother would give you when you were a child, just coming and putting her hand on you and saying, how are you feeling right now? What do you need? And we have to become our own mother, like in a lot of ways, right? We have to love that self, that inner child that we are, and give ourselves that love, that supportive, caring love, and we have to do it intentionally. We have to, like you're saying, build these habits in for ourselves so mindfully, because we become so programmed to do this for everyone else, as you've pointed out. And it's so essential to develop the habit of doing it for yourself as well. I love it.
Absolutely. Well, and that piece about the inner child is very powerful. And, oftentimes, and this kind of leads into the next thing, which is mindset. And so knowing that we are worthy of this, but that's where this piece about the inner child comes in, because, most of our limiting beliefs are put in by the time we're 7. And so it is what it is, right? And, we trust that our parents did the best they could with us, with what they were given. However, some of these beliefs can be with us throughout life unless we address them. And so I believe that inner child visualizations and meditations and tending to the inner child is very powerful. And this comes up a lot with clients where they don't feel like they deserve to rest.
I remember you talking about how you felt like you weren't a good enough mother to your son. And I mean, you were making your own baby food. You were doing all these things, and yet you still felt like you weren't enough. And I think that's a very common theme that I myself have experienced, many women I talk to have experienced. And I personally I was so lucky to get to find out about and do EMDR therapy for several years. And a lot of the inner child work was some of the most powerful and life-changing for me. And I still do visualizations and still utilize many of the tools I learned in that practice. And you don't have to go to EMDR therapy to do this work and do this type of practice. It's available for us, and you're describing it. And I just think it, like you said, it's so powerful, and it's such a great tool for resetting that unhealthy mental framework that we're not worthy or that we're not deserving.
Meeting yourself as a small child. I think, you have to be ready and feel comfortable, depending what has happened in your life to get to that spot. And that's where I think working with someone, whether it's a counselor, a professional, a coach, whoever that may be, can really make a big difference. Because I do think it's a juncture that you come to and your nervous system has to be ready.
Yeah, I mean, EMDR work, for those of you who maybe haven't heard me talk about it before, my experience with it, it's really in particularly beneficial for those who suffer with PTSD. And quite a lot of people have had traumatic experiences. I mean, I would say the greater majority of people have experienced trauma to some degree. And that's an important thing that really impacts our nervous system for years, especially if it is in your childhood or early childhood development or birth experience, like you've mentioned. I mean, this can have long reaching echoes throughout your entire life that are very subconscious. We're not aware of why we've developed coping mechanisms or patterns to get through the day in the way that we have, or why we are so reactive to things the way we are. And a lot of it can come from, these core issues. And yes, it is. And for me personally, I'll just say, to my personal experience, was so helpful having a guide, having a coach. I also did a lot of neural feedback work. I went to 40 Years of Zen, which is something that Dave Asprey created, which is a really special type of, they do a very curated neural feedback practice, which involves a lot of forgiveness work and a lot of deep trauma healing type things. It was really, really powerful for me. And I'm just so grateful to have had access to information about how to heal my brain and heal myself. And this kind of work that you do, that's so encompassing of so many of the issues that the modern woman is facing in her day-to-day life. So important. And really glad you're talking about the inner child work. It's really powerful.
It is. And I think it's so deeply valuable too. And it's one of those things that's not really brought up in everyday life, and I think that women tend to be really hard on themselves. Like, why, I just need to get up earlier, and I just need to do this, and I just need to do that, or I should do this. And, and I'm a firm believer that if you're saying you should do something, then it's really time to look at it and say, why? and do you want to do it? Right? Like, why do you need to get up earlier? What's the function of that?
And then you have on the flip side of all that shooting all over ourselves, this whole like, I'm not motivated anymore, or
Right.
I'm burned out, right? And we get burned out because we've overloaded ourselves and overloaded our nervous system with all this should, I should do this, I should do that. I've got to do more because I'm not enough. And it's this bottomless pit, and it can lead to these horrible burnout, this fatigue.
Yes. And so this is where women start looking for ideas, right? When they hit that kind of burnout point. And so one of my favorite things to offer is for women to take a sleep vacation.
Ooh, tell us about that.
And so a sleep vacation is committing to 5 days of going to bed at 9, no electronics for 2 hours before bed. And even if you're not asleep by 9, you're in bed so that you're ready to begin to cultivate rest. So you can read a book, you can just relax, you can whatever. Like being in bed by 9 consistently for 5 days. And then if you're able to, just allowing yourself to sleep as much as you want to sleep. Now, while that's not always feasible, the being in bed by 9 usually is, if we prioritize it for the 5 days. And it's really striking how different you can feel in 5 days of cultivating rest consciously.
I like imagining that you're having a vacation in a cabin in the woods where there's no internet connection.
Yes. Yes.
And like, okay,
that would be ideal.
I'm gonna take a sleep vacation in my imaginary cabin in the woods, and the internet stops working at 9:00. So my phone has to be off. And I would add to that, put your phone on airplane mode starting at 9:00 so you're not tempted to be messing around on your phone. And don't turn your phone off of airplane mode until after you've gotten up in the morning, maybe had breakfast, done things for yourself that cultivate that inner peace and set the tone for your day. Because don't let the world in until you're ready.
Exactly.
And shut the world out when you're ready at night. Like those boundaries are important for your mental health.
Yes. And so the sleep vacation is a great reset to begin to allow you to cultivate rest in your daily day.
In your daily day. Is there a bigger picture to that? What about
There
your
is,
long?
Yeah. So as you're beginning to cultivate rest, right? So prioritizing it, and then you have your rituals and routines. So we talked about kind of the body check-in, but then the other piece of that is kind of that like afternoon slump where we want to get maybe a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a pastry or whatever it may be. If you're able to, especially with so many people working at home right now, I love for people to take 15 minutes and go lay down and maybe listen to a guided meditation. I personally really just like to lay down with my legs up on the couch and maybe like a weighted blanket on my abdomen and just listen to a 10 to 15 minute meditation. And I feel completely refreshed after. And, we have all these wearables now. And so you can see what's happening. Yes. And it's phenomenal how you can shift yourself into the parasympathetic system.
Oh, so phenomenal. And why she laughed, you guys, was because I was just like wiggling my fingers at her, showing her my Oura ring, which I've talked about so many times, which is really, in my opinion, one of the best sleep tracking apps that I've ever used. And not only does it show me the data, it makes me want to beat my data or makes me really want to get good sleep because I want to be able to see my sleep score go up. And I love that it has guided meditations within the app that encourage me to take a break during the day and meditate, or it'll have like just really peaceful sounds. I could just listen to nothing and just peaceful sounds and just close my eyes. And it shows me my resting heart rate during that time and my heart rate variability, which are really important markers of stress and recovery and rest. And that's just, and whether you have a wearable or not, this stuff is happening when you take that moment to time out for yourself. I love that, Amisha. That's just
absolutely
so great.
And I think with the wearables, it's so nice because you can see when you're shifting yourself into parasympathetic, and you can see where you live most of the day. And so while we don't have to have them, if you do have one, I think it's a great way to track, well, where am I living most of the day? Just because it gives you raw data. And so, yeah, I love the Oura Ring, which is newer to me. And then I also love the Garmin Vivo Smart 4 because that has a algorithm on it for your body battery, which it uses heart rate variability, but it tells you like how full your body battery is during
That's
the day.
so cool.
And then how quickly it goes down. And so you can kind of watch and see, and you can see like where your blue is, which is your parasympathetic, and your orange, which is your stress. And so it's not to say you're not going to have stress in a day because it's normal. If you go work out, that should be a little stressful.
The type of healthy stress, right?
Exactly.
There's healthy stress. There's stress that's not so healthy. And sometimes you're going to have a little bit of both in the same day. But the goal is to also be having that calm time as well to balance it out, right?
Yeah. So if you live in this world of orange, which is the stress, then, it's just maybe time to be like, okay, how can I shift my days to just bring in a little bit of this? And it can be as simple as taking 3 deep breaths every hour.
And like you said, checking in with yourself every hour.
Yes.
Just even if you're just, I feel good right now, I'm just going to take 3 deep breaths and send love to my body, healing to my body, or my hip feels tight. I'm going to stretch for a minute and then I'm going to, sit back down and get back to work. But I've thought about myself in the midst of thinking about everyone else.
Yes. And so, I think one of the things that's so valuable about this and beginning to cultivate rest is that whatever your days are like now, wherever you're at, if you're on this burnout spectrum right now, like there's so much hope out there. And I think that when I was there, I really didn't feel a lot of hope. I was just like, this is going to be my life. And so just kind of really letting women know that it doesn't have to be that way, whatever your situation is. Yeah. There's always some little shift that can happen, which can change the trajectory of where you're going.
And back to my mantra, which is all or something, not all or nothing. This is exactly what you're saying here, where we can make small steps. We can do one small thing that can really shift things for us. And resources like Amisha's sleep guide, which is 40 days to bettersleep.com, which I absolutely love. That's a great resource. And we'll have a link for that in the show notes, as well as links to your website and everything that you do. But you've just shared so much value with us today and so many practical and applicable tips that I'm so grateful for. I want to invite you now to leave our listeners with a little challenge that they can take on in the coming weeks to keep you in their mind and to see how things can work for them. Do you want to share something? Maybe we talked about it already. Maybe it's something different. Yeah. I just would love it if you would give them a little challenge.
Yes. Well, so, I would challenge you to take a sleep vacation.
Yes.
Yes, because it is the reset for your circadian rhythm. So get yourself to bed by 9, delegate whatever needs to happen. Maybe you need a little more support this week. Maybe you're going to order in food. Maybe your partner's going to cook this week. Look at what it is that you're doing that is maybe keeping you up past 9 and see if you can begin to delegate. Will it matter if for a couple days the dishes aren't done every night, right? And maybe it will for you, but see what can be delegated out for 5 days. And maybe part of that's over a weekend. And so for 5 days, prioritize your rest. Make this commitment and get yourself to bed at 9. When you get up in the morning, get some sunlight, whatever kind of light you have where you live. Get yourself to a window or outside and allow that light to come in. So you're resetting your circadian rhythm. Maybe you can do a little bit of mindful movement in the morning, right? I love just cat arches with the breath, like a cat-cow, first thing in the morning with the breath. If you do yoga, you can add a downward dog in. Doesn't have to be a lot, but just to get yourself moving, get some fresh air, and then do your body check-ins through the day. Set the timer on your phone to go off every hour, 8 to 5, and just notice. And I encourage you to keep a journal, write it down, and just notice what the emotions are that are coming up. And you'll begin to see a pattern that, at 2 o'clock, I'm always tired. That's a great time to do your restorative 15 minutes. and beginning to build this into your day. How we live our days is how we sleep at night. And this ultimately is how we live our lives. And so if there is any part of your life where you are not feeling that it is optimal, I would encourage you to take a sleep vacation and see if it begins to shift.
Brilliant. I love it. Thank you so much. And I really encourage you guys to take that sleep challenge. A lot of those practices that she's describing are things that have helped me so much. It's part of why I have all my brain power during the day and I feel so balanced and rested. And thank you so much, Amisha, for coming today and having this conversation with us and sharing all of your knowledge and experience with us. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation, and I really appreciate your audience and just having the opportunity to talk about this.
100%. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for listening today, Rockstar. I appreciate being able to share these conversations with you so we can keep learning together. Be sure to check out the show notes page on thebettyrocker.com/podcast for links to all the things we mentioned in the episode. And leave me a question or comment there or on any of my social media pages where we're connected. Coming up next, I'm excited for you to hear from my good friend, Erin Alexander, a pioneering manual therapist, author, and movement coach who is the founder and creator of the Align Method, which is a guide to using posture and body alignment to build strength, achieve peak performance, reduce pain, and find a new sense of confidence in yourself. He's sharing some really accessible, practical, and amazing tips with us in this next conversation. So stay tuned. And until next time, I'm Betty Rocker, and you are so awesome and amazing. I'll talk to you again real soon.
This podcast is for information purposes only. Statements and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Brie Argetsinger, Betty Rocker Inc., and the producers disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. Before starting a new exercise, fitness, or health protocol, or if you think you have a medical problem, always consult a licensed physician.